It's the Blood Red podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome along. Darwin sees red on his Reds Anfield debut. Questions for Klopp and the ongoing transfer conundrum. Plus, we'll assess how bad the damage is to the title race after two full starts in the opening weekends of the Premier League campaign. To get into all of that, we have our Liverpool correspondent. Even in an injury crisis, he's cool, Paul Gorst. Also drafted in to help in our time of need. Versatile super sub himself, Sean Bradbury, and the face that runs the place, Joe Rimmer. Gents, I trust you're all well. Gorsty, you were at Anfield, and as said at the top there, another full start, another 2 drop points. How bad do you think the damage could be?
Long term, I think it actually could be quite significant, to be honest. Last season, Liverpool drew 4 times at Anfield against Tottenham, Chelsea, City, and the one which stands out like a sore thumb was Brighton when they led 2-0. If Liverpool, it's easy to say now in hindsight, but if Liverpool would have held on to that win, they'd be Premier League champions, and they can't afford to be giving Manchester City any kind of leeway at any stage of the season. Fortunately, we are only 2 games in, so it'd be a little bit bordering on the ridiculous to say that the title hopes have gone, but we know that there's nothing between these 2 teams, and Liverpool simply can't afford to be allowing City to build up a bit of a head of steam. So the worst start to a Premier League season under Klopp, successive draws, and I think most people would have earmarked these 2 for wins, wouldn't they? A few weeks ago. So yeah, it's a massive blow, and you can maybe understand the performance of Fulham, brand new team promoted, absolutely flying with confidence given what they did last season. Cried right behind them, catching Liverpool cold a little bit, but no real excuse for yesterday. We know that Nunez got sent off. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail, but just didn't really create any massive opportunities, and it was just so unlike Liverpool. And we will see in 8 to 9 months' time, but I think that was a pretty damaging result last night.
That's the thing, Sean, isn't it? Is now there really is no margin for error at Anfield.
No, that's certainly true. Albeit, I think until such time as Liverpool have played City at least once, perhaps even twice, I don't think you can be writing them off unless some massive gap does open up. But they're the games that if Liverpool have still got the possibility of playing City and beating them and overtaking them, I don't think you can really be too negative until that point. And the good thing now, I think, is there is a chance to respond fairly quickly and put things right. Given we've got this strange season where there's quite a few games in August before that first international break kicks in, and there's more in September. I think after this weekend's events, in terms of what happened for Man United, everyone was licking their lips for next week. That game at Old Trafford, and the complexion of that has changed a little bit. But just looking at that game specifically, the pressure is much more on Ten Hag and United than it is on Liverpool, despite what we've said about 2 frustrating results to start the season for Klopp and his men. But United away, Bournemouth at home, and then Newcastle at home. I think if Liverpool are going to be involved right at the top end of the table this season, we'll see a response quite quickly. And I think to try and see the positives, if you look back at the last couple of seasons, when Liverpool have encountered adversity, albeit 2 seasons ago, it took a little while, they did find a way to respond, didn't they? They dug in, they got that situation eventually where the midfielders who were stepping into defence, kept their places in the usual spot of midfield, and Phillips and Williams got Liverpool over the line and shot up the table, made it into the Champions League. And last season there was that mid-campaign reset, which Klopp and the players have spoken about, and how vital it was when there were some games that were getting away from Liverpool, they were conceding leads early on, and then they just focused on the defence and got things sorted. I think it's time for one of them already. And I know you could say, well, it's panic stations, it's 2 bad results, that they really need to start turning things around. But they've got a full week to do it now until United comes around. And I'm backing Klopp and Liverpool to find solutions despite the injury crisis that is unfolded and despite what's happened with Nunez. Yeah, it's very, very early days for me. And draws are always frustrating. And when you get 2 in succession to start a campaign, it's pretty bad. But there's a hell of a long way to go. And I think that's how you've got to see it.
But I suppose taking that into consideration, Joe, there is a hangover, albeit for 1-2 trophies last season, from the end of last year. This statistic that's doing the rounds of now, 6 Premier League games they've conceded the first goal in, 8 of the last 10 games. One of those was a goalless draw in the FA Cup final with Chelsea. Where's the security gone for Liverpool that for so long they seem to have shown?
Yeah, a couple of things first. You know all about hangovers, don't you, Guy, after this weekend?
Yeah.
You should probably finish the pod by telling us all about your ankle. And,
Yeah.
and just
we'll get to that in the injury list.
Yeah,
we can add into that.
Yeah. And is Sean, have you got the jet on autopilot while you give us your take on the red, Sean?
Just parked outside, yeah. It's getting a few admirers in the street.
Yeah, love that headset. Back to the question. Sorry, a bit distracted. Back to the question. I think I think that Klopp's spoken, hasn't he, at length about how the parade at the end of last season picked them up a lot, and whilst I think it did, I also think there's a bit of psychological hangover from last season. A little bit. It's seeing that they sort of came towards the end of the season, they looked tired. They felt tired. They were just about getting over the line in some games, and then obviously didn't get over the line in the Champions League final, and it was a tired performance. And I think the Charity Shield aside, which gave me great hope that they were going to be very, very good and hit the ground running. The first couple of games, I think they've looked tired, disjointed, and I think personally, I just think the injuries are to blame for that. I think recruitment is to blame for that. I think pretty frustrated with what is fast becoming a very stubborn club, and sometimes manager, it's a strength for him, isn't it? Obviously, and you're never going to sit here and criticise Jurgen Klopp too much, but I do find, even before the game yesterday, I don't know whether you saw the interview on Sky before the game, but he slightly odd that he took issue with the Sky reporter asking him why Darwin Nunez was going to start the game, and he picked up on that and sort of had a little pop, and he just looks frustrated, tired, and slightly stubborn. And I think, I'm sure we'll get onto it. I think Liverpool should be doing some work at trying to strengthen in midfield to try and ease the pressure on the players that are in there. Curious that Naby Keita didn't come off the bench last night, but yeah, I just think it's a tired team that's carrying a lot of injuries, lack of confidence, and these little, they've conceded the first goal in 8 of the last 10, is it, or something like that. I think that it's not a coincidence. I think these things sort of snowball, and I think the more that it happens, the more that it will happen until they sort of manage to have, what was it Sean was saying before, they had that mid-season sort of reset last year, and until they have one of those resets, I don't think it will stop happening. So it's a concern, really. I mean, I wouldn't sit here and say, oh, well, I don't think Liverpool will challenge for the league. I think it's very, very close, and obviously the standards that the two sides have set, you drop points in any game, it feels like a defeat, and certainly 2 games on the bounce, you feel like it's a million miles. But let's not forget that City were 15 points clear at one point last season, and Liverpool pulled that back. So City aren't infallible. They will drop points, and Liverpool will go on runs. But I just think that something doesn't feel quite right. I wish they would address it, and I think that the transfer market is the way to address that, but they don't seem to agree.
No, Paul, let's get into the major incident then against Crystal Palace. Darwin Nunez, it was his home Premier League debut. It was going to be the game where everyone got a chance to see him from the off and see what he could do. But in the end, he lasted just around an hour after he decided to lay the butt on Joachim Andersen.
Yeah, it's a worrying one, really, because I mean, you wouldn't have Joachim Andersen down as one of the great wind-up merchants of the Premier League. So, if he's reacting like that from what was pretty standard kind of fare, really, wasn't it? It wasn't anything out. He didn't throw any dangerous ones in on Nunez, nothing kind of over the top. It was just standard stuff. And for Nunez to react like that, it's a lesson he's going to have to learn. We spoke to Virgil van Dijk in the mix zone after it, and he basically said he's going to have to learn from it. And Jurgen Klopp said he's going to have a word with him. So hopefully when he comes back in September, he will have learned his lesson and know that he can't do that. He can't lash out in that way, especially when VAR, the VAR era. I'm slightly worried now because it was already a bit of a difficult adaptation period for him coming in and replacing Sadio Mane effectively. Liverpool adjusting to a little bit of a new style of play with a big number 9 up front. That was always going to take time, and now it's been pushed back by 3-4 weeks. So that's a little bit of a concern already. And just following on from the point Joe makes about Klopp basically suggesting that a little bit of a terse reaction to suggestions about playing Nunez. I mean, he said last night something along the lines of, it feels like we've there was a witch in the building that's training last week because of all the injuries that they've had, and basically suggesting it's a bit of a curse. But that'll cut no ice with people who've been demanding that Liverpool do something a bit more active, because this injury crisis is not unprecedented, is it? And it's something that, look at the players who have pulled up injured, Matip, Thiago, as Joe says about Keita not getting off the bench. I'm not convinced that he was 100% yesterday either. Oxlade-Chamberlain. They're not players who, who've previously shown that they can play 50 games a season. So it's nothing new for Klopp. And I think maybe being a little bit stubborn and suggesting that there's a curse and whatever else is a little bit disingenuous, maybe. We can't criticise Klopp too much, but certainly I think that he, those comments are a bit. I mean, I don't think he can pull the wool over too many people's eyes, if I'm honest.
No, Sean, in terms of Darwin, then how much of a setback do you think it's going to be for him to get into this Liverpool side and kind of really hit the ground running now from this point? First player since Joe Cole to get sent off on his first Premier League game at Anfield for the Reds. And I mean, a lot of people were saying it was a bit innocuous, he turned around and maybe Anderson was closer to him. But when you see that there was a running battle before that where he tried to get him, there's not really much of a defence, is there? No,
absolutely not. And you're right to refer to the incidents that happened before. There is a little compilation doing arounds on Twitter that shows that it was exactly that, a running spat through the game. It reminded me almost of like five-a-side when you get a wily veteran campaigner who just uses a bit of old man strength and dirty tactics to unsettle like a young buck. But at the same time, like Gorsty said, that's not unusual. Like that's Premier League defending, isn't it? There's a lot of robust defending and people who push things to the boundaries and test referees and see what they can get away with in games. And that's the concern now. It is a bit of a signal that that's what you can do to Darwin Nunez until he learns and he adapts to the league himself, kind of mentally as well as physically. But I think you've got to look at the impact he's had so far in games, and what he did against City, what he did for the bench against Fulham was very impressive. Even against Palace, he didn't put the ball in the back of the net, but he had two very good opportunities to score. I think there's question marks about how well he fitted into overall play on the night, but there's no question that if you get the ball in his vicinity, he's going to be dangerous for Liverpool. It is just now problematic that it almost feels like when he comes back from this ban, which presumably will be 3 games, won't be any more than that, hopefully, he's starting again from scratch, isn't he? It's like this little bedding in period where there's a good run of games and winnable games coming up. I would say at least 2 of the next 3, if not all of them. If he got a couple of goals in that time and really start to settle and form a proper partnership with Salah and Diaz up front, it would have been really useful. And there were a few other things, to be honest, that concerned me a little bit about him. There was a moment where there was a handball appeal, wasn't there, where he was in the box and he just didn't play to the whistle. And, the ball was still bouncing around in the area and he was just concerned with looking at the ref. And as well, when he had to be escorted off the pitch by Milner several times and you had Klopp on the touchline screaming at him to get off. They're just little things that I do think the senior pros of the club and the manager just need to get in his ear quite quickly. And we've already seen, Milner was obviously doing the Sky interviews after the game. He was asked about it. He was like, yeah, we'll look after him. We'll do what needs to be done as a squad. Gorsty speaking to Van Dijk after the game, and the quotes we've got there have just gone up. He's saying similar. He needs to learn from this and put it behind him, accepting that it will be a learning curve for him. And obviously the manager said he'll speak to him. So I think all of that needs to happen, pretty quickly. And whether it's good or bad that he's got a few weeks to stew about it, I'm not sure. It's not immediately good in terms of embedded in, but I wouldn't say there's long-term worries about him. I think we've seen already how dangerous he can be, but he does need to keep those emotions in check a little bit and find a way to do that pretty quickly.
Yeah, his first red card of the season, obviously for him, so pretty sure violent conduct, 3-game ban for him unless Liverpool appeal and it's deemed frivolous, and no point of appealing then could take it to 4. So he's likely to miss Man United, Bournemouth at home, Newcastle at home. Joe, he would be set to return for the Merseyside derby. I mean, talk about having to learn quickly. He'll definitely have to for an atmosphere like that, no?
Yeah, no, I'd play him. I don't have any issues. I kind of think he's certainly not going to come back and headbutt someone immediately again, is he? He'd have to be completely crazy
he's
to do that.
He's going to be a target, though, isn't he?
He will, but I think that might almost play into Liverpool's hands a bit if they're so concentrated on trying to wind up Darwin Nunez. Well, there's certain other players in the Liverpool team that could benefit from that. So I don't, I think it's been a weird weekend for incidents being blown out of proportion, and this is just another example. Look, it was a moment of madness. He got sent off. He get a 3-game ban. The manager will have a word with him. He'll know he's stupid and wrong, and we get on with it. I don't think. Look, I don't think having a bit of a hothead streak is the worst thing in the world. Suarez, Rooney, Cantona, you name it. There's been a few of them, and the boy certainly shows passion, doesn't he? So I just think he's been a bit jittery. I think he's desperate to impress, and that's channels its way into something that shouldn't have happened. But like Sean says, I noticed the whole thing where he didn't seem to play to the whistle with the handball. But I think again that sort of stemmed from him not taking a chance he should have taken, and sort of was desperate to get something out of it. And and I think once he settles down a bit, he'll start taking chances better. Because again, still find him an odd player to watch. He seems so scruffy. I mean, some of the touches he takes, the volley that he sent over early doors, even the chance that hit the post. I'm not convinced. I think he even really controlled it. Didn't he? I think it came straight off. All right, Frankie. Why has he always got to have a word of what I'm trying to say here? Always butting in. Yeah, no. Even that chance, he didn't really. I don't even know if he took the shot. It seemed
he seemed to run into the ball, didn't he? Rather than shoot, he seemed to run into it.
The defender, I thought, might have just tackled that onto the post. So even that in itself, and I just think right now he looks like someone who's really desperate to impress. In the same way that Haaland looked in the Community Shield, and didn't quite play the way he should have done. I think it's up to Liverpool to just get him settled down and playing his natural game, and he'd be okay. But as for the red card, I don't think, obviously we're in the business of making a lot out of talking points. That's our job. But at the same time, there's another part of me that thinks, let's be sensible. I don't think that Darwin Nunez is going to get sent off 10 times this season, because every Premier League defender is going to get to him in that way. I think it was one incident. He'll feel stupid. He'll apologise to his teammates, and everyone will move on, and they'll put it behind them.
Yeah, no. Before we talk about transfers, let's get on to a bit of class in the game, Gorsty, that has completely been overlooked was Luis Diaz. I mean, until Nunez was sent off, he was a bit of a passenger for Liverpool. We didn't really get involved all too much, and then down Liverpool go down to 10 men, and all of a sudden he was playing like 2 men.
Yeah, the interesting thing was, if Nunez was on the pitch, he'd probably looked across that ball, wouldn't he, instead of dribbling past 3 men and sticking it into the bottom corner. Klopp got asked about Diaz on Friday in the breakout, and all the questions in kind of our section were all about Diaz, and he was opening up on things trying to improve his numbers, really, because I think we mentioned it on last week's pod, didn't we? Me and Joe, it's now's the time where you're turning those ones where he's at the post, or the keeper's made a good save, or that was close, it just went wide, turning those into goals, and that was a stunning way to start that, wasn't it? It'll probably be one of the goals of the season at Anfield. It just has to build on it, I guess. He was on the periphery of the game before Nunez got sent off, and then he almost seemed to take a little bit of responsibility following the sending off, and started taking the ball by the horns. He was a lot more aggressive, it seemed, chasing things down and making the ball stick, winning a few free kicks. And the goal was superb. So, more of the same, I guess. Still not quite got that understanding with Andy Robertson that Sadio Mane did, but that was obviously built up over years, and Diaz has only been here since January, so that'll take time. But, I suppose while he is kind of still getting up to speed in the same way Nunez definitely is, it doesn't hurt when he's lashing in goals like that. So, what an Old Trafford next week would certainly be another massive step in the right direction.
Yeah, certainly. Would one player, Sean, who's maybe not quite up to speed that people have been talking about, and he was kind of beaten in the build-up to Liverpool's goals, Fabinho?
Yeah, you know what? I thought in the Fulham game, he looked particularly leggy, and obviously there were problems across the midfield in that game. You'd say that was the main area in which Liverpool lost. Well, didn't lose it, but, lost momentum, and the reason why it was a draw. I actually thought he started pretty well and looked quite sharp, and was kind of getting into them and doing what you expect from Fabinho, and was one of the reasons Liverpool were pushing up and keeping high and able to squeeze and threaten early on. But then, obviously what happened for the goal was unfortunate, and he probably would have been hanging his head after the game and taking some responsibility for that. But I just think that will happen occasionally, and it was almost just like a sequence of perfect events, wasn't it? Like Palace did everything so well, the dribble from Eze, and it was such a good finish by Zaha. And I think that did tap into another problem Liverpool had on the night, which was, and I don't want to completely point the finger at one player. I don't think you can after a performance like that where only one goal is scored as well. But Nat Phillips just felt like with and without the ball, he was a bit of an issue. It was, if Palace had the ball themselves, they were clearly targeting him, trying to get around him in whatever way they could, over the top, through balls. And when he had the ball, it almost seemed like they were happy for him to amble around with it and try and bring it out or pass it. And they'd press others, the likes of Van Dijk and Trent, ones that they felt were a bit more of a threat. So I think that was an issue. When like we were talking about before, when him and Williams had that partnership that was successful with Liverpool over that spell of games, I think the team in general made allowances for them, didn't they? And just recognised that this isn't going to be Van Dijk and Gomez or Van Dijk and Matip or whatever. And the way that you build from the back will change as a result. But it was almost like he was thrown into this game and just told, well, go and be Konate, Matip, Gomez, go and do that job for us. And the difference when Gomez came on in terms of what Liverpool were able to do and therefore how weirdly threatening they did look when they were down to 10 was an issue. But yeah, problems there, but I just hope that Liverpool thrive on certainty of purpose, don't they, and unity of commitment and intent. That's when the team's at the best. And I think you've seen problems across midfield and defence and the forward line in these last few games, or this first couple of games. So I just hope things can settle a little bit. I think Firmino was all right, albeit culpable for the goal. But Elliott was excellent, and those two are what you base the midfield on for United, and you go forward from there and try and get into a bit of a rhythm. But confident they can do it.
Yeah, now let's get into then the injury crisis and perhaps the need to address it in the transfer market. Sean mentioned there, Joe, that Nat Phillips was playing effectively fifth, if not sixth choice centre back, who Liverpool, I think if they'd had a decent offer for him for the last 3 summers, probably would have been happy to have moved him on a permanent basis. James Milner also, albeit played well, 37 years of age, continues to be the man in the midfield that Klopp turns to. And I suppose when you look at the bench, it shows kind of, in a way, the lack of depth, that an injury crisis that many could have probably predicted, with, as Gorsty said before, the names who are on it. I mean, look at the bench, Gomez, Henderson and Keita are all kind of either listed as injured or carrying knocks. And then you got 3 youngsters in by Setic, Vandenberg and Bobby Clarke all there. The depth that was on the Liverpool bench at the end of last season seems to have evaporated. And they've got just over 2 weeks. Is it something they can, should or will address in the transfer market?
It's something they should. It's something that they can. I don't know whether they will. I never fully believe that. Especially when you look back at the centre back situation. Look what it took for Liverpool to make a move in the transfer market. It took a hell of a lot, and even when they did, it was very much like, well, we're still not going to buy someone for the long term. We're still not going to spend a great deal of money on someone. We're getting people who will just about get us through. One of them never played for the club. So, I'm never convinced that they will. Although, some of the noises Klopp made in the last week or so suggest that he's not as close to it as perhaps he would have been a few weeks back. But my big issue is this has just been staring Liverpool in the face for the last year. And it's getting worse because players are getting older. They're playing more games. And, I just think, it's all well and good. We hear so much. They've got the bodies, they've got the numbers in midfield. Well, I just don't buy that as an argument. They could have 100 midfielders, but if 99 of them have a history and of injury problems and don't play a great amount of games, then there's no point in having them. But you can't rely on them, can you? And I just look at it and think, this isn't to dig out James Milner, because I still think he's a really handy player who should be starting some games for Liverpool. But my worry now is that Liverpool are going to be relying on James Milner to start the next 2-3 games until they get others fit. And Liverpool, if they want to seriously challenge Man City and challenge for the big prizes, cannot be in a situation where they are putting a guy who's 37 who should be putting out some fires, but putting their faith in him for the next few games. And I have to say, I think they've put themselves in that position because they, I get that they want, maybe whether it's Bellingham, and I get that they want to wait, but think I say this to you, Sean, earlier. Even if they get Bellingham next year, they'll still need more, won't they? Because Keita could leave on a free, Milner could leave on a free. Jordan Henderson will be another. Oxlade-Chamberlain, Jordan Henderson will be another year older. Thiago will be another year older. So I still would argue they still need more, even if they get Bellingham. So why, Liverpool are quick to let it be known that they're very clever in the transfer market. They're happy to take that credit. So if they do plan 2-3 windows ahead, why didn't they plan for this? They're not as. I don't think that I think Liverpool have done some great stuff, and I'm not in any way sort of being overly critical, but no club gets everything right, and I just think that Liverpool had hoped that certain players wouldn't be injured as much as they had, but I think that the evidence shows that they are. Thiago, great player, doesn't play enough games. Jordan Henderson, great servant, won't play enough games. Naby Keita could be a good player, doesn't play enough games. It was very curious that he was on the bench. Liverpool needed a goal. He was, you look at him as a player that would have been creative, and they didn't bring him off. So they didn't bring him off the bench either because they didn't feel like he was fit enough, or Klopp didn't fully trust him because he hasn't liked what he's seen in training. And if it's the latter, it's really worrying. If it's the former, then it's just typical of his time. And I think even now, to go out and buy some in the last 2 weeks of the window would seem slightly knee-jerk, and I don't know whether it even solves the issue, but I think they should have been looking at this earlier in the summer. And, it's frustrating. So, yeah, there you go.
And I suppose, Gorst, as well, within it, Liverpool have, in a sense, backed themselves into a corner that next summer, the recruitment on the midfield would have to be faultless, because, as Joe says, there's going to need to be probably more than 2-3 midfielders you're probably looking at. All of a sudden, that's overhauling a large part of the team all in one summer, where you're needing players to bed in. They acted and moved very quickly, obviously, to bring in Darwin Nunez once Sadio Mane had said he was moving on. But we did a podcast with Jamie Carragher ahead of the Champions League final, and he was saying the one thing he thinks Liverpool need amongst everything else this summer is to go and strengthen that midfield. Fabio Carvalho's come in, but you can't seriously be saying he's the guy who is going to come in this year and really light it up in that midfield.
And I felt a bit sorry for Carvalho yesterday, because he's getting brought on when Liverpool are in dire need of a goal, and he's only 19 and making his Premier League debut for Liverpool, and far too much pressure and responsibilities getting put on his shoulders. Even just like the decision to let Origi and Minamino leave, what Klopp would have given for one of them coming off the bench last night. The attacking options just weren't there, were they? I mean, Naby Keita was probably the most attacking option available to Klopp, most senior attacking option, and the fact that he didn't get on says to me that he was carrying a little bit of a knock himself, which I'm sure wouldn't shock absolutely anyone if we found out that to be true. Bobby Clarke's on the bench, Stefan Bajcetic, Seth Vandenberg. Is this where Liverpool are already in the season because of an injury crisis that, looking at it now, it seems as though they just kind of kept the fingers crossed and hoped that wouldn't happen. And 2 games into the season, it already has. My worry is the long-term one, obviously, is the midfield question, which never really seems to go away. But I think Liverpool need an attacker now as well, because Diogo Jota hasn't played since May, since the Champions League final.
I suppose the worry with Jota as well, though, is that's a reoccurrence of the hamstring he did against Midtjylland or whatever. So is that now a question? I mean, you look at great Liverpool forwards of yesteryear, the likes of Michael Owen, the likes of Fernando Torres. Once those hamstrings begin to become a bit of an issue, they can consistently prove a cause for concern. Yeah,
but he picked it up on international duty with Portugal, didn't he? And then it went again in the first training session in Thailand, I think. So he hasn't had a pre-season, so he's not going to be coming flying out the blocks when he's eventually back from this hamstring injury anyway. Roberto Firmino, for all his ability and his importance still to this squad, I thought he was abysmal, frankly, at Fulham, and is now 3rd choice in that list of 3. And none of them might even be available for Manchester United on Monday. So as much as the midfield debate lingers, there's also one to be made for an attacking option as well. And it looks like we're being a bit wise after the event, talking about Minamino and Origi leaving, but just having one of them last night might have made a big difference, mightn't it? But instead, Klopp's having to bring on, Henderson, a 19-year-old kid, making his debut when the Kop are absolutely baying for a winner. So it already looks ominous, really, which makes us all sound like Doyley.
Season of transition. You've got to remember that one.
Yeah.
Sure, no, it's kind of the point, though, isn't it, of the Minamino Origi thing, of probably more Origi than Minamino, who was great in the cup competitions and didn't do all too much maybe in the league, but was it the strength of the running last year for Liverpool was the way in which Jurgen Klopp could shove Origi on, have Diaz wide on the left, Salah wide on the right, and Origi often as part of a 4-2-4 as an extra striker on the pitch, there as a goal getter to sniff one out and score. He did so in the derby. I remember he came on against Norwich, and the game seemed to change on his arrival at the same time. And it just feels as though the strength of the running was the fact that Liverpool had so many attacking options. Yet this season, it's now 9 players you can have on the bench and use 5 of them. And all of a sudden, again, no offence to him, but young Bobby Clarke's there.
Yeah, exactly. Players who know their role and can come in and strike up some kind of understanding with the forward line straight away is vital. I mean, I agree with the guys. I think the squad is definitely a player light, but I'm slightly torn. I'm probably 75-80% thinking that it needs to be a midfielder, a number 8 midfielder with a more attacking bias, and 25-30% thinking that it should be someone for the forward line. I suppose some of it depends on where we see more of Elliott and Carvalho playing. I mean, like Gorsty said, I felt very sorry for the young lad having to come on and be thrust into that forward line. And it did feel like he carried the expectations of the attacking options on the bench by virtue of, being a bit older than Bobby Clarke and playing a lot of football last season for Fulham. But I do think we referred to this before, that I take a little bit of hope from what Klopp said this week in a very relaxed interview with Sky, where I might be putting 2 and 2 together and turn it into a 30 million signing that won't happen here. But he did feel like he let his guard down a little bit. And, he was contrasting what was said about Liverpool's midfield earlier in the summer when he said, I've got everyone fit. What type of midfielder are we missing? To now. And he admitted, the situation has changed slightly. And for him to do that, not get defensive, not talk about his options, suggests to me a little bit that, things might be slightly more open to someone coming in. That might be a little bit of a leap and maybe nothing will happen. But I think if you look at these 2 games, genuinely without knee-jerking, you can make a case that there is deficiencies in the squad, especially given the injuries, which you have to take into account. That first game, going back to what I said before about Fabinho and others, I think that was the midfield that for a long time we all wanted to see, the one that started against Fulham and has started a few times, Fabinho, Thiago, Henderson, and none of them looked right. None of them looked at it. And okay, that might be a heavy pre-season. It might be, like Joe was saying before, some of the psychological hangover from how the last couple of games panned out last season and just the general toils of competing on all fronts. But it could be something more than that, couldn't it? All of those players are getting on a little bit, and there will be a point where they start to dip over their peak and start coming down the other side of the curve. And then, as Gorsty said, it was the bench, wasn't it, against Palace? That's the one where you look at it and you think, wow, well, okay, if things need to change, where is that happening? How is that happening? So, yeah, I think it needs to be done. And I do think this might be ignoring some of the realities of football and how transfers work. But I think you can genuinely make a case to a player that if you come in and everyone gets fit, then, okay, there'll be a lot of options. There'll be a lot of competition. You might not get as much football as you'd like if you sign for Liverpool right now. But this season is just going to be mad, isn't it? It already is. There's going to be so many variables. God knows what's going to happen when the World Cup kicks in. And it seems to be so many players coming down with little muscular injuries already. If you've got a tournament in Qatar in the middle of the season and you're coming back and having to rejoin your domestic squad, I think there's going to be a lot more there with players in and out of fitness. So I genuinely think you could make a case to someone who, if there were doubts about whether they should come now or next summer, from that point of view, I think there's a case to be made. But it comes back to what Joe said before: are the club going to really push for a target? Or maybe, compromise a little bit and go for a second choice target to get someone through the door. But I think it's clear that it does need to happen in some form, whether it's, as I say, a number 8 or someone who can join that forward line.
How much do you think, though? I mean, the players signing for Liverpool are elite professionals, aren't they? Who, once they're being kind of told that the club want to bring them in. I sometimes wonder how much they're thinking, oh, exactly where am I going to play? They back themselves, don't they? They arrive at Liverpool and they think, you know what, I'm coming in, I'm going to be playing. I mean, Joe, a lot of it's been spoken about kind of how if Liverpool were to make a move, it would be being opportunistic. I mean, Liverpool have Naby Keita in the final 12 months of his contract. Look at, for example, Yuri Tielemans at Leicester City. He's into the final 12 months of his contract. He scored a belter in the FA Cup final last year. It was only then, and he was a fulcrum of a Leicester team that nearly reached 2 Champions League finals. Would he not fall into a bracket of the kind of guy who actually 25, 30 million pounds, he's Premier League ready, could slot in? No?
Look, you know, for all my big moan before, I'd never like to get into names because I think, personally, I think, you know, you say someone like Tielemans as well, you know, I don't watch enough of him. You know, I saw him score a belter in the FA Cup final, but I don't watch enough for him to know whether he'd fit into Liverpool's midfield. I'm not paid to watch every league and watch every game, but Liverpool have people who are, and they, you know, and maybe they have explored options and they really don't think they're available this summer, but then my argument is they should have planned for this last year or the year before that, because they knew that they had a nucleus of players there who either are getting older or growing older together, or they are already injury prone, which is Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain, and so I can't get into names because I think that's just totally speculative, but yeah, it's the planning that I'm frustrated with, because whilst they may go and land Bellingham next summer, you know, I think that they're in such a dogfight with City for honours that every year that goes by that they don't win something, I kind of feel like is almost a waste. You know, I think Liverpool are that good that I don't want to see them go through seasons and not win things or compete for big prizes. It's why I don't buy into, you know, Doyley's season transition thing. I think it's a load of rubbish, because I think a team as good as Liverpool shouldn't need to go through a season of transition. I think they can swap a player and still operate like City do. And I know City spend more money and operate on a higher plane, but, you know, Liverpool have shown that in the last few seasons they can match them almost stroke for stroke. So they should be able to handle selling a Mane and bringing in a Nunez, or adding a Bellingham to their midfield, or bringing in Konate for a Matip in defence, and be okay. They shouldn't need, you know, I always thought seasons of transition are for a club when you sort of, you know, Arsenal. I mean, sorry,
When you underperform, it's a term for we've underperformed, but we kind of knew it was coming.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think teams like Arsenal, Man United, Chelsea, they're all teams right now who can use that we're in a season of transition, because they've not bought well enough in recent years, and they've not been managed well enough in recent years to challenge at the top. Liverpool have, and I don't think they can hide behind seasons of transition. It's not as if they've sold half the squad. In Man City let Aguero go 2 years ago, and you know he was their top scorer. And one guy that they built the team around, and they let him go and found a different way of playing. And now they've brought in a whole new type of striker, and have let Sterling go. Well, couldn't City say that? Well, it's a season of transition for us because we've let Sterling and who else did that go?
Jesus.
My man, Jesus, 2 massive players for them, and brought in Haaland, totally different type of player. So I don't buy into that. I think that's Doyley trying to protect himself because he doesn't really like making predictions. And I don't think Liverpool are in a season transition, and I don't think they can hide behind that. I think they've changed one major player, but other than that, I think they should be better and better prepared for this season.
Yeah, no, let's throw ahead a bit then and talk of the injury crisis and just how bad it is, Paul, for Liverpool right now. So at the top, I'll add my name to the injury list. Unfortunately, at the weekend, I was out in Manchester on my stag do 4 weeks before my wedding, and have fractured my ankle. So I'm added to the injury list, but I'm still podding here, Gorst. You look at that injury list that the Reds do have, and Joel Matip, Jurgen Klopp was asked about him after the game, and he said 2 weeks. Oh no, it could be more. Actually, I don't want to put a time scale on it. Thiago's obviously out, so too Diogo Jota. Certainly that top end of the pitch with Darwin Nunez not available for Old Trafford as well. There's a lot being put on Roberto Firmino being back. Otherwise, what is the option?
Salah down the middle, Elliott off the right. Diaz and Salah as a kind of two. I don't know. It's
Fabio
see,
Carvalho false 9, Naby Keita false 9.
See, this is how kind of ridiculous it's got to already. That these are your options. We're talking about Harvey Elliott and Fabio Carvalho, and they're only teenagers. They shouldn't be expected to be, this kind of burden already. They should be playing when Liverpool have got the tails up and they're getting a little bit of experience in there and just building and getting themselves, comfortable instead of being asked to perform here and now, and we've got to hurry up because City are 4 points clear. Honestly, I don't know. But the people who are injured, it's just no shock, is it? Joel Matip had a strong season last year. That he wasn't really injured anywhere near as often as recent years, but now he's pulled up again. Oxlade-Chamberlain hasn't kicked the ball since that shot against Palace, which was over a month ago now in Singapore. Thiago pulls up 50 minutes into the new season with an issue. Naby Keita, didn't play against Fulham because he was ill, but it wasn't COVID. Not sure how bad the illness was. I think if all of us were struggling with a bit of illness, we'd probably still make it to, 6-a-side on a Thursday night, wouldn't we? It's just, it's an issue within this Liverpool squad. They did so well this year, kind of avoiding real serious injuries. There were obviously one or two who did pick up niggles and knocks, but the makeup of this Liverpool team is not anywhere near as durable as you'd like it to be. There are a host of players within the squad that you would term as injury prone, and that has already been shown up, and it's undermining Liverpool already.
We'll have to wait and see how bad the damage is to the injury list and the rest for Liverpool. I've enjoyed the five-a-side references today. Can almost smell the deep heat coming off the podcast as well. But from myself, Guy Clarke, Paul Gorst, Joe Rimmer and Sean Bradbury, thanks for your time and your company today on this edition of the Blood Red Podcast. Until next time, it's bye for now.